Welcome to another edition of Moxie Talk, where we give you an intimate look into the courage, character, and defining moments of today's most inspiring individuals. I'm Kirt Jacobs, host of Moxie Talk, where previous guests have included leaders from the world of politics, business, culinary, sports, entertainment, art, community activism, and philanthropy. Today, our 306th guest in our series is Lee Pennington, a poet and filmmaker. Now, for those of you who don't know our guest, allow me to read some of Lee's bio. Pennington is a graduate of Berea College and the University of Iowa. He holds 2 honorary doctor degrees, a Doctor of Literature from World University and Doctor of Philosophy and Arts from the Academy of Southern Arts and Letters. He taught for nearly 40 years, the last 32, as Professor of English and Creative Writing at the University of Kentucky's Jefferson Community College until he retired in 1999. Not to mention, Lee is the author of 22 books, including I Knew a Woman, Thigmotropism, and Appalachian New Ground, each nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. His latest book is Daughters of Leda, selected as a finalist for Best Book of Poetry, published in 2017 by the American Book Festival. His Songs of Bloody Harlan was reprinted and re-released in 2019. He has had over 1,300 poems published in more than 300 magazines in America and abroad. He has had 9 plays produced, wrote the script for The Moonshine War, starring Alan Alda, Richard Widmark, etc., has published thousands of articles and short stories in everything from Playgirl to Mountain Life and Work. Since 1990, through his video production company Jolie Productions, go to jolieproductions.com for more information. Lee, along with his late wife Joy, has produced 21 documentaries, including In Search of the Mudmen, Whales, History and Bondage, and Secret of the Stones. Since 2011, Lee has produced 5 more documentaries: Some Days You Clean, Some Days You Litter, The Amazing Warner Sizemore, Room to Fly, Ann Caudell's album, Bosnian Pyramids, Hidden History, Seafaring Strangers, Vikings in America, and Gunung Padang, Monument to Atlantis. Lee has traveled extensively in the United States and in all of the Canadian provinces except 2, and in 90 foreign countries. For the past dozen years, he has served as president of the Ancient Kentuck Historical Association, a group dedicated to the study and research of pre-Columbian contact in the Americas. Now listen to this. In 2013, the University of Louisville opened the Lee and Joy Pennington Cultural Heritage Gallery, named after Lee and his late wife Joy. The gallery contains U of L's most valuable works, including the likes of first editions of Galileo, Copernicus, and Sir Isaac Newton. It will house all of Lee's writings, films, and many artifacts he's collected traveling around the world. He presently lives in Kratz House, a designated historic home in Middletown, Kentucky, with his lady, I like this, Jill Baker, an artist who has illustrated several of his books. Lee, it is truly a humbling and honorable pleasure to have you here on Moxie Talk with Kirt Jacobs. Thanks for joining us today.
Kirt, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. What drives you to excel in your area of expertise, and the decades upon decades you've been doing it and staying at it in a creative form that I would argue sometimes is more frustrating or challenging than not? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what drives you?
Well, I think it's curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally a curious person, have been curious all my life. I think we as humans are curious.
Mm-hmm.
I used to use the illustration with my classes. If I take a box and put it in a room and put a lock on it and say, do not disturb, and walk off and leave it, people will literally try to kill themselves to get that lock off and get in to see what it is. So that's the curiosity. The curiosity leads to the second important part of the thing, I think, and that's discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so long as I can be curious and can make discoveries, I'll be a happy camper.
Whom do you credit most influential in your life, Lee? And it can be more than one, personal or professional, or maybe academic in this case.
Well, I'm glad you said more than one.
Yeah.
Kirt, every person I've ever met in my life,
mm-hmm.
every single one has influenced me. There have been some that influenced me deeply. My parents, for example.
Mm-hmm.
My father always said, a person is only good as his word. Mm-hmm. And that stuck with me very, very early on. I remember one time I was with a bunch of guys and we were going to get together on a Saturday and dam up the creek and make us a swimming pool or swimming hole. And it came up that there were several people around going to go to a movie, and I kind of wanted to go to the movie. And Dad looked down at me and said, "What did you tell the boys about helping with making the swimming hole?" And I said, "Well, I told them I'd be there." He said, "Well, be as good as your word." Mm-hmm. And so I dropped everything. I didn't go to the movie, and I went to the swimming hole area, and I was the only one that showed up.
I was wondering if you were going to say that.
Yeah. And my mother was, we called her the flower woman. Mm-hmm. She taught me very early on, if you've got flowers, you've got to give them away. Mm. If you don't give flowers away, they will die. Mm-hmm. Now, that has a truism connected to it. If you have flowers, they have to be thinned. And so if you'll take them and dig some out and give them to somebody else. Mm-hmm. So that was really important to me, to learn that things in life need to be given away or they die. And that came from my mother. In the 7th grade, I had a teacher that just made me so curious and made me so excited. His name was Bob Waddell, and I've always given him credit for setting a fire under me so that I knew that I would be going to college. And I didn't know it till that time. My sister had told me in the 6th grade, she said, "Someday you're going to go to college." I laughed at her. Mm-hmm. I thought I was going to be a sheep farmer. But, okay. But Bob Waddell struck something in me, and he would never accept credit for what he did. He said, if I accepted credit for Lee, I'd also have to accept credit for those people who were in prison that I taught. So he never did want to do that. But everybody I met, I had in high school, I had a wonderful English teacher, Lena Nevison. She was just an amazing teacher. I had Jesse Stewart. Jesse put so much faith in me, and put so many things on my shoulder. It was just totally unbelievable. But everybody I've ever met along the way has had some influence, whether I've met them 5 minutes or several years. I listen to people. I listen to what they have to say, and it's a great journey when you do it that way.
You know, I would argue that's a bit of a lost art in 21st century planet Earth, if you will. We
have to learn to listen. My late wife, Joy, and I produced the Corn Island Storytelling Festival for 27 years, and we did a thing. We formed an organization, and guess what we called the organization?
What's that?
Not mouths, we called it ears, because the most important thing was listening. Mm-hmm.
What was the most defining moment of your life, Lee? It can be more than one, personal or professional.
I think the most defining moment probably happened when I was 8 years old. My mother called me in one day, and she sat down with me, and she said, "Now, I don't mind your having your rock collection in the house," she said, "but I'm concerned about the rattlesnakes that you're keeping and the copperheads that you're keeping."
They're alive, right?
They're alive,
okay.
And they're in big jars, but I had them under a bed, and she said, I'm very concerned about those. And she said, "Now, if you want to stay in the house, you have to part with those. If you want to keep them, then you have to move out of the house." At 8 years old, I moved out of the house. And,
How does that work?
well, you go to the meat shed and you take your pets with you.
Well, I'll be.
And from the time I was 8 years old, I never again lived in the big house or slept in the big house. I was always in a smokehouse or a shed or something.
So you got along with family. There was no animosity or any of that kind of thing?
No animosity whatsoever. But the fact that my mother had given me such independence at 8 years old has played an enormous part in the rest of my life.
Yeah, because most parents would have fought you on that. You know, you're coming back in the house, blanky, you know, and that's it. You know, end of discussion. That's pretty remarkable, really.
Mom and Dad both permitted the kids to be independent. And they had a bunch of them. There were 11 of us.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a whole other TV show. Reality TV, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Lee, what is your biggest professional triumph?
You know, things that come along professionally. I get excited about small things as well as I do large things. And I can't tell a whole lot of difference between them. But you know, I think probably just as an honor, the Lee and Joy Pennington Cultural Heritage Gallery at the University of Louisville is a stunning thing to happen in one's life and one's career. I've had been nominated 3 times for the Pulitzer on books of poetry.
That's something.
As I tell everybody, these are like a summer rain. These honors, they come and they feed the crop water and they make things happen. But they're not the most important thing in life. The important thing is doing the thing itself, or connecting with people in such a way that the world is a little bit better.
So connecting with people is more important than recognition, is what I'm getting.
Absolutely, for me. When I see somebody, the first thing I want to know about them, and I'm sincere with that.
Well, that's me, my friend. That's the show in a nutshell.
Yeah,
I mean, that's it. I love that.
I want to know, what's your name? Where are you from? You know, what do you do? What are you passionate about? And that's important to me. That's extremely important.
And you've been that way since you were 8, back to that?
Well, I was been curious all my life, as I say, but when I was 8 years old, I had that opportunity to either keep my rattlesnakes or
that's a great story.
move out of the house. But you know, I stopped keeping those pets in captivity, the wild animals. I once lived in a little house that was a shack next to the big house. And I did have wild pets. I had a wren come in, and an overcoat I had on the wall, the wren built a nest right in one of the pockets and would raise Cain every time I'd come in there and sit around any time. And I had a big black snake that would crawl up on the windowsill. And one day the black snake fell in the floor, and it was a linoleum floor, and he couldn't get any traction, so he was quite frightened, and I picked him up and put him back on the windowsill, and he crawled away, and I thought, well, he's gone forever. But a little bit later, here he came back and was up on the windowsill again. But I never did keep the poison snakes in captivity. You have to force feed poison snakes when they're in captivity. They will not eat on their own. So.
Things to live by.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
We don't have time to get into why, but that is right. Why is that? I got to know. I'm curious.
I have no idea.
That is crazy.
I used to catch rattlesnakes for the Cincinnati Zoo. They would pay me $1 a piece for them, and that was big time money back in the day.
Yeah.
But I never did know why a poison snake wouldn't. You could put something in with it, and it just wouldn't touch it.
So they go on a hunger strike when they're in captivity.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice ever given to you, Lee?
I've had several pieces of advice, so I'll share a number of them that I kind of live by. One of the things that Tom Mullen told me one time, he was a minister who wrote a book called where 2 or 3 people are gathered, somebody will spill some milk. and Tom told one time, he was one of the teachers up at Ball State University at the Midwest Writers Workshop where I was working, and he got up and announced to everybody, "Sin bravely." And that's been decent advice for me. Sin bravely. Another piece of advice that I got from an Oriental expression. I used to keep this over my old typewriter on the wall. Everybody says, "I don't have enough time. I need more time.
I'm too busy.
I'm too busy." There's an Oriental expression that has been so valuable to me, and it goes like this: "A butterfly only lives a few moments, and even then, there's time enough." And that's been just totally part of me.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to say that a discovery and a piece of advice given to me many years ago by an old sheep-faced looking man called Jim Osborne.
Okay.
Jim Osborne told me one time that he would give me $5 if I'd go up on the hill and pick different leaves off of different trees, and if I found any 2 leaves the same color green, he'd give me this money. And I knew I would get my money, so I went up on the hill and I got 32 different kinds of leaves from white oaks and sassafras and poplar and greenbrier and poison ivy. I didn't care. I got a leaf of everything. Came back down and laid them across each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get my money.
The word
There were
thing.
no 2 leaves the same color green. And that was some advice that I realized. Not only are there no 2 leaves the same color green, there are no 2 people the same color green.
Amen. Very true.
There are no anything the same. Everything is different. And it's that difference that makes the world exciting.
Mm-hmm. What is it like to be Lee Pennington? I've been wanting to ask you this since the day I met you.
I've been having a good time doing it.
Yeah, you have. I can tell.
For the last 80 years, anyway. I think to be Lee Pennington is on a total adventure throughout life. I've always been on an adventure. I just the whole world is an adventure to me. Every day is an adventure. Every single experience I have. Sitting here is an adventure.
Sure.
Going out on the street is an adventure. I'm excited about everything around me. And that's the part of life that is Lee Pennington, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I first met you, and I got wind of you through one of our former guests, Dick Wilson, a good friend of yours we've had on.
Incredible friend,
yes,
yeah.
Great man. And I started doing my research of you, and then we started connecting in Facebook and social media and whatnot. And what struck me is your energy level and your passion. A lot of people, to be honest, that have lived as many decades as you have, don't have an openness to new technology. Communicating with you is like communicating with anyone my age or younger. And that's just remarkable, I think, characteristic of your curiosity and your openness to new things.
We have to go with the new technology all the time. I mean, I'm not as good at it as I should be.
No, but you're pretty on the spot.
But Mark Twain was the first writer to write a novel on a typewriter. Mark Twain. If Mark Twain were here today, he would be flying jets. I mean, he wouldn't be doing the steamboats out on the water.
Good point.
He was doing, the technology of the day and the time. And if he were around today, he would be just excited about what was happening. I had a mother that was born January the 16th, 1900. She lived to 2002. Wow. So she lived the entire, except 16 days, 20th century. Can you imagine all the things
she saw
that she saw and happened to her? I did a documentary on her, and it was just amazing. You know, we're talking airplanes, automobiles, radios, television, everything you
The
can
internet
think of.
at that point.
She witnessed and was, you know, literally a part of it.
And that's my son's birthday, so they're in good company. So this next question, I'm curious to see your answer to. Can you define in one word poetry or filmmaking?
Sure.
You've got two different worlds there that you've really been.
It's the same thing.
Okay.
And the one word I would define it as is discovery.
Mm-hmm.
I write poetry to discover. I discover things in poetry that otherwise I couldn't discover.
Mm-hmm.
I make films to discover.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the word I would use all the time. It's just I can't imagine it any other way. It's a little like my teaching over the years. I taught many classes. I never had a class that I gave the students as much as they gave me.
Mm-hmm.
I never was able to teach more than they were teaching me. Yeah. And so that discovery. Poetry or filmmaking is not really a form of doing something. It's a way of living.
Okay.
And I tell everybody, to be a poet is not to write poetry. To be a poet is to live poetry.
I like that. I like that a lot. So let me ask you this, because, I watched programs, songwriters, famous people, everybody has a process, when they create. How do poems come to you? Is it the middle of the night and you wake up and scratch it down? What is it?
Every way that you can imagine, poems have come to me. I've worked on poems as much as 10 or 15 years on a single poem. I've had poems, the last 3 or 4 years, poems have been coming from aliens or something, from outer space. It's amazing to me, the process that is happening now. They're flowing through me. I'm probably doing a poem a day, averaging a poem a day.
So does it literally, the synapses fire and it just like formulates in your head that quick? Or do you get a piece and then add to it?
I get an image.
Okay.
I get an image. And an image will, it'll be a strange kind of unusual image. I think it was A.C. Bradley who said that over and above all good poetry is an element of strangeness. Well, to me, it's that strange image that comes into my mind. As soon as that image starts, it fires something up, and then it's off and running. It's like the Kentucky Derby. you never know which horse is going to come out at the end when it starts.
Exactly. If someone were to ask you, Lee, what is the single most positive contribution you made to humanity, what would that be and why? It's a self-interpretive question. It can be as 30,000 feet up or as granular as you like.
I think, I think I would have to say if I've contributed anything to humanity, and I always wonder if I am, I think it would have to do with my teaching.
Okay.
I taught nearly 40 years with some branch of, or the main campus of the University of Kentucky. I also taught writers' workshops all over the United States and especially all over Kentucky. Taught in every university in Kentucky except Northern. I never did get a workshop there. But over the years, I think I probably had, I'm just guessing wildly, maybe 10,000 students.
That was my next question, roughly. Wow,
yeah.
That's a small city.
It's just a small guess. And I think if I've left anything for humanity, it was imparting onto those students their ability to do things that they didn't dream they could do. We sell our students short. We say, you can't do that. In 1965, I went to Harlan County, Kentucky, and taught the first writing of poetry class ever taught in the state of Kentucky. It was a class that the University of Kentucky had put on their schedule for the late Hollis Summers, a very fine poet who was up at Ohio University at Athens. And he was a visiting professor at UK. And he never did teach the class, but it was still on the catalog. That was in about 1954, and it was still on the catalog when I got to Harlan County in 1965. So I jumped all over it. So wound up teaching the first writing of poetry class. Those students in Harlan County, I had 4 creative writing classes that I taught in Harlan County. One semester I do poetry, one semester I do fiction and poetry. And of the 2 years I was there, those students, I had 13 students in each class. I don't know how that wound up. This is the way it turned out. Those students published over 3,000 pieces of writing in the 2 years I was there. Just because I think I let them be themselves and let them know that they had potential they didn't dream of. When I first went to Harlan County, they wanted to talk about New York and Paris, and I would say, what do you know about New York?
Right.
What do you know about Paris? And then I would say, what do you know about Harlan County? And they knew more about Harlan County than anybody could dream about.
Of course.
And they published in over 300 magazines internationally.
You know, and back then, getting published, it was more arduous. You know, you didn't have this flow of information like we do now. That's remarkable.
You know, that's long before the internet.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes it that number even more astounding. That would be astounding now.
Well,
wow.
it was an exciting time, and it was. Harlan County is an amazing place in the world.
We're going to talk about that in one of your books.
Yeah.
If you could change one thing in your life, Lee, what would it be and why? I call it the magic wand question, you know, no limitations.
Okay. Of my own life, I wouldn't change anything. I would not change a single word, a single sentence, a single emotion, the good things I've done, the bad things I've done. And there have been a nice balance of each, I would say. But whatever that stuff has been, that has formed whoever I am now. And I'm happy with who I am now. I'm not.
No, it's obvious.
I'm not angry with Lee Pennington. I'm saying, okay, you know, Dad used to say, do the best you can. And if you do your best, nobody else can do better because they can only do their best. Now, they may go higher on things or lower on things.
Have different talent or whatever.
But everything, you know, if you do your best, that's as good as you can do. And I just can't think of a single thing that I would change. The tragedies, and there have been tons of them, the happy moments, everything. Who I am today is a result of every single one of those, every single second of those. And I'd be messing with Providence if I wanted to change that.
Well, how about in the world in general?
In the world in general, if I could change anything, I would say, let there not be war.
I second that.
Let there be peace.
You had mentioned tragedy, and I asked you this before we began, and you're open enough to be talking about it and offering it to the audience, but you were married once, Joy.
Indeed.
And you all were married for how many years?
49 years.
And can you share that experience?
Oh, sure. Joy and I had an incredible run, and we knew that at the end of Joy's life. Joy's family had cancer genes, I'm sure, because it ran in the family. She lost a brother and 3 sisters, and so she kind of always knew that was in the background, and she got stage 4 cancer back and lived the doctors gave her 2 months when they found out. It was everywhere. I mean, they did a biopsy, but said they couldn't even tell where it started. It was in her lungs, it was in her bones, it was in her brain. But she outdid them. She didn't do any chemotherapy or any radiation or anything. She accepted this was the way it was. They gave her 2 months, and when she didn't die in 2 months, she started having a party every 2 weeks with only.
That's why y'all were married so long.
only very
Something you'd do.
Only very close friends, you know, and I've told everybody. I took care of Joy, you know, kept her at home the whole time, and I told everybody, and it was true. The best time of Joy's in my lives together was the last 5 months, because everything was devoted to this
union. Is that
this
fair?
union, this love. It was the best time of our lives. And
See, that's what's remarkable about you. A lot of people be bitter, and you're not.
there's nothing to
not.
be bitter about. This is the universe, you know. And the good thing about the universe is we pass through, and then we get out of the way and let other people come along.
Good point.
You know,
Good point.
there's an old mountain story on Jack. Most people know Jack and the Beanstalk, but there are over 900 stories in Appalachia about this character Jack, and it's a world story. I mean, he's Jacques in France and Ivan in Russia, and it's the same guy. And anyway, there's a story that Jack catches death in a burlap bag and ties him up and takes him up in a tree and ties him up in a tree. Nobody can die. And that's kind of fine for 300 or 400 years, but then people continue to get older and older and older and more wobbly, and their bones are banging together and making all sorts of weird noises, but they can't die. And they start hating Jack. And it gets so bad, Jack finally goes to the tree and climbs up and turns death loose. And all these people who should be dying are able to die.
Yeah.
That is death is as much a part of life as is
Birth, I guess.
living.
Yeah.
And Joy's death was, you know, it was not a sad affair. Joy would not permit anybody to come around and weep. If a friend came around and started weeping, she would say, "Get them out of here." Yeah. And they can't come back if they're going to cry. And
great.
we had a celebration for her, and Joy said on one condition, that nobody cries. And I walked in, we had it in a funeral home, and I walked in, and every other seat had a box of Kleenex. And I said, "Get the Kleenex out, you know.
Yeah.
And we're not going to cry."
Yeah.
And I told everybody, anybody can get up and say anything you want,
Oh, that's
but
great.
you can't cry. I said, I didn't do this, but I said, I'm in charge of the microphone, and if you start crying, I'm turning the microphone off. Now, people got close, but they made it through.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
Dynamic
like that.
It was a wonderful life celebration. That's what Joy wanted, and that's.
Well, you get to
What
see
you
her
got?
again. That's my belief anyway.
Yeah.
When we're all out of here. Much different question. Could you describe in detail a particular scenario or incidents where you utilized your own philosophy on leadership? It could be personal or professional. Kind of where you practice what you preach, if you will.
Yeah. You know, when I was growing up, Mom and Dad used the old McGuffey readers. These were books that were used in the schools.
Okay.
Mid 1800s on up into the 1900s, substantially along, and they had stories in them. And Mom and Dad used these stories very often to teach us something. One story that I remember vividly was called "Stick to Your Bush." Had to do with two young men. They were getting ready to go out and pick blackberries. And one of the fathers called his son aside and said, "Now look, son," said, "when you get to the blackberry vines," said, "don't just grab the big ripe ones and then run to the next vine." Said, stay at that vine until you picked every ripe berry off the vine. And that's what the boy did. That day, the two boys went out and they picked berries, and one boy ran from bush to bush, just picking the big berries, getting the big ones. The other one took his dad's advice and stuck to the bush till he got every ripe berry off. At the end of the day, the boy that stuck to his bush had his bucket full. The other guy who had run from bush to bush, just grabbing the big ones, only had a half a bucket full. When I started teaching in New York, I got put in charge of the debate team at Newburgh Free Academy in Newburgh, and it came debate tournament time, and finally the state finals, and the state finals was held at my high school, so I was in charge. Didn't mean to be, but but there I was. My brother Paul called me. This was in 1963. My brother Paul called me and said, Lee, Dad is dying. Said, if you want to see him, you got to come home now. You can't wait. And I said, Paul, this may sound awful, but I said, I'm in charge of the New York State debate tournament, and I feel an obligation to stay here. I said, of course, if Dad dies, I'll come home. But I said, I've got to stay and finish this tournament. And Paul went and told my father what my situation was. Dad sent me a message.
Okay.
Dad said to Paul, tell Lee to stick to his bush. And I knew exactly what that meant.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So Dad did die, but that was a moment that has always stuck with me.
It sounds like the relationship I have with my father, but that's another show.
Yeah.
We were like that. We could say one thing or a look, and we
And
had
you
that kind
knew-
of connection.
you knew
Oh,
the
yeah,
whole
we were
connection.
symbiotic, even though we
Yeah.
were blood, but we had that bond.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing
and,
that.
incredible. Thank you.
Now, Lee, like a lot of our guests, they bring in materials to show their wares throughout their life. But you, my friend, have quite a collection of items here. So what I'd like to do for the audience's viewing pleasure is we'll start over here, and maybe you can describe around the tables that we have here what these are. What's this one?
Okay, that's a book called Appalachian New Ground, and of course I grew up in Appalachia, and didn't have any idea I was poor until I went to college, and I found out that with our family we made about $2,000 a year, and with our family at that time, poverty level was 4,000 for our size.
And there was,
family.
what, 13 of you, counting your
Well,
parents?
yeah, counting the parents. But anyway, I tell everybody that we had to borrow $2,000 to get on the poverty level because we were
Wow.
we were a couple $1,000
I
below.
don't mean to laugh, but I got your point. Yeah.
But well, I never did know I was poor growing up, and in many ways I was never poor because we.
Don't you kind of think poor or it's a state of mind? I don't want to get too far afield because we have a lot to talk about.
I've been without anything to eat, and I've been with a lot of money, and I can't tell the difference. It's the
Amen.
same stuff. But Appalachian New Ground, after my book Pragmatism came out, and I was just going like a bat out of it, trying to get published. And one time I decided to get a poem a day published. And so I had to put 300 or 400 things in the mail at all the times to reach that. I didn't make it. I didn't get 365 poems published in a year, but I got 340 some published in that year. And I never would have made that number if I hadn't been reaching for the higher thing. But I reached the point where I was saying, I'll continue writing, but I'm not interested in publishing. It was 20-some years between Pragmatism and Appalachian New Ground without any publication other than what people had asked me for. But I came out with Appalachian New Ground. I wanted to honor the place I came from, and that's what that book's all about.
And the one in the middle?
The one in the middle is Songs of Bloody Harlan, and in 1965, when I went to Harlan County and started teaching creative writing there, I wanted the students to have the freedom to write about their own area, and I gave them that freedom. And they published 3 books before they published the final book that got me run out of Harlan County. The final book was called Tomorrow's People. Jack Weller had done a book called Yesterday's People, and the student said, what about us? We're tomorrow's people. We're not yesterday's people. What about us? And I had a friend at Berea, Mike Clark, that was a good photographer, and I said, would you come down and take pictures? What would you charge me to come down and take pictures of the students to go in this book? And he said, $50 and all the beer I could drink. But I wish I'd have cut off on that last part. That cost me a fortune. But anyway, he came down and he got the students in their environment. They were beautiful, stunning pictures. And these were put with their poems in Tomorrow's People. Well, I think for the first time, people saw the pictures and they read the poems. I think in the other books, they didn't lock in on the poetry.
Okay.
The poetry was not that much different. But I had to cover the cost of some of the other books, but I didn't have to cover the cost of Tomorrow's People. The reason I didn't was it sold out in 500 copies in 5 days.
Wow.
Except for 20 copies I sent to Jesse Stewart because I thought the books were going to be confiscated. But the top blew off the whole system. I was threatened. I was.
Speak to that for a moment. We'll come back to the items. What was the backstory there? Why were you threatened? What went wrong, so to speak?
People, not the common people of Harlan, or not the students or anything like that. The power structure.
Okay.
The power structure of Harlan took offense at students talking about him. One of the poems said, where the mayor's son has a son on the poverty program while children eat rocks in the streets. One of the poems said, where the county sheriff has a son by a local woman. And the county sheriff didn't like that. Rattled a few skeletons, I suppose.
Sounds like it.
Anyway, the thing blew off the top, and I ultimately, at the demand by the late John Oswald, who was president of the University of Kentucky, called me up late one night and said, I want you out of Harlan County. And I said, no, I'm not going. I'm staying here. And he said, I'm the president of the University of Kentucky. You're my employee, and I'm giving you a direct order. Get the hell out of Harlan County. And we came out at night, armed guard in front of us and armed guard behind us, and with a .357 Magnum laying on my lap.
So they knew you were leaving? Like word had gotten out that you were leaving, or you just didn't know? And
they had no idea. We left everything in the house and sent a furniture mover.
Now I want to touch on this for a moment. You know, the whole thing about the meat house and, you know, when you're 8 years old and living on your own, that seems totally counter that experience in Harlan, basically being told you're going to do something that you obviously didn't want to do. Or did you just realize there's some pragmatism to staying alive?
Well, the whole thing was I was idealistic, but I was going to protect my students at all costs. I'd lived my whole life, I thought, as a pacifist. When the guns came out and the dynamite came out, I had dynamite put in my stoker. I was shot at. I had some contracts taken out on my head. But I was going to stay. I knew I was going to die, but I wanted the story.
That's my point.
I wanted the story out into the open, and I came out of the county and and called the Courier, and they wouldn't touch the story. And I called the Attorney General because I'd had a threat made on my life. I called the FBI because my telephone had been tapped, and then went back into Harlan County. But I planned to stay, but I knew I was going to die. The paper that broke the story was the wonderful paper of Tom Gish up in Whitesburg called the Mountain Eagle. And, Tom's office had been blown up several times. He had to establish new offices, but he wasn't afraid. There was a hotshot reporter out of Boston that came and interviewed me and did the front page of the story. And after the story came out and after we left, I spent the next 2 weeks, I put 4,000 miles on the car and didn't get out of Kentucky. But I was never in one place more than one night. And I wound up in Bowling Green, and the late Kyle Vance, who was a wonderful reporter for Eastern Kentucky, somehow knew I was in Bowling Green and got on the phone. I was with Jim Wayne Miller, wonderful poet there, no longer with us. And Jim Wayne said, Kyle Vance is on the phone and wants to talk to you. And I said, no, I'm not going to talk to him. But he finally got me in there, and I talked with him. And I said to Kyle Vance, Kyle said, would you give me this story? And I said, I tried to give it to the Courier a week ago, and they wouldn't touch it. And he said, I'll touch it.
Okay.
And I knew the story was going to come out in the Courier the next morning. And I told Joy, I said, that's going to say we're in Bowling Green, and we ain't going to be in Bowling Green. So we headed off, and we went up to Berea. And there was a very funny part to the story, I thought at the time. There was a newspaper there, and as I went in to pay for a little motel room, I put my money in the box and got the newspaper. I glanced at the headlines, and when I came back out, I told Joy to roll the window down, and she did. And I said, some SOB from UK got run out of town. and I went in the room, poured myself a scotch, and got up on the bed and opened the paper up and found I was the SOB. That was the Lexington leader, but they had done a front page story. Well, it hit the Courier Journal the next morning, and it was just, it went in 4,000 newspapers across the United States. Songs of Bloody Harlan. Live your life as a pacifist your whole life, and then have something happen and you're carrying a 357 Magnum, which will shoot through a V8 engine. Are you kidding me? So that was incredible effect on me. I didn't know who I was or where I was. And it was 2 years before I wrote anything. 2 years. And then finally I said, why? Why do you want to say anything? And it came to me, just because I want to say it. A writer doesn't have a choice. If it's there, you've got to write it down. You have to let the chips fall where they will. So that book came out, and it was published in North American Mentor magazine, the whole magazine. And then they wanted to do the book, and they did probably 200 copies altogether. And that was 50 years ago. It was selling on Amazon for $2,500 if you could find a copy. So publishers were interested in bringing it back out, and that's what this is.
So of all the things on the tables here, and we'll talk about the rest of them, is that your pride and joy, or do you look at them that way? They're all different, or how do you look at it?
They're all different. My pride and joy is this one because that's the latest one. But, they're all different. Every one of them's different. I mean, it's you won't even recognize me in this book.
Okay.
To read that book and this book.
You wouldn't think it's the same author?
No, it's a different world, different time.
What are the two little objects there on the table there?
Two little objects. In 1972, I went with Jesse Stewart and Dean and Joy. We all went on a sort of a European tour, and we wound up in Egypt.
Oh, okay.
And I had a wonderful Arab guide in Egypt, and I wanted to buy. Back in those days, you could buy artifacts, Egypt had so many that they didn't even care if you took them out, and so there was no checking. So I asked my guide if he would hook me up with a tomb robber, and so he took me over to Memphis, and the tomb robber, the Soviet Union's time, the Russians were excavating, and they'd excavate all day, and the tomb robber would rob all night. And anyway, he had these in his building, and so I picked out some things I wanted, and we started bargaining. And these are a couple of the items, the Egyptian items, and they're for real. This little guy here is very important to me because Dick Wilson was over at the house. And I said, Dick, I want to show you something. So I got this little scarab, and I said, see this scarab? He said, yeah. I said, it's 4,000 years old, and I don't have any idea what it's worth. And then I picked up this other scarab, and I said, see this scarab? He said, yeah. I said, I bought that on the streets of Cairo and paid $1.29 for it. And Dick said, you're going to die, and people are going to come into your house, and they're not going to know the difference between this one and this one. And he said, I've got to introduce you to somebody. And so he said, I want you to have lunch with somebody that I know at U of L, Delinda Bowie, who's head of special collections at U of L. And so I thought my things, no university's going to want my stuff. But I thought, I've got the best Jesse Stewart collection, private collection in the world. So maybe I can say, I'll give you Jesse's collection if you'll, put mine in the file cabinet. And so, but when Dick said to Delinda, I want you to meet Lee Pennington, she quoted some of my stuff to Dick.
Oh, wow.
When Delinda was at Alice Lloyd College, that little book there, The Dark Hills of Jesse Stewart, her teacher used that book as a textbook at Alice Lloyd College. I had no idea this had taken place. Delinda was interested in my things rather than Jesse's stuff in particular. So the Lee and Joy Pennington Cultural Heritage Gallery at the University of Louisville started with this little scarab.
Life's amazing. How things, the tributaries and things that happen in your life.
Indeed.
Moving on here, you've got several items here. If you can talk through those quickly, if you can. I know it's a lot of stuff there, a lot of good stuff.
I got a lot of books there. I Knew a Woman was, I've always felt that creativity is feminine. And I always felt there are more male artists than female artists because the women can create the epitome of creation. The male can't. The woman can create life. Oh, the male has a little few seconds
there's that
investment in the whole situation. But it's the woman who can create life. That's the epitome of creation. Artists, poets, whatever, they have to make
filmmakers.
art. They have to paint, they have to make books and things like that. So I Knew a Woman was my attempt to give something back to the process that I've been involved with. And there's one other thing over there I want to talk about.
That rock? It looks like a rock, but I don't think that's what it is.
Looks like a rock. When I go to a new place, and it happened in Middletown, the first thing I want to do at that place is put out a garden. I want to put seeds in the garden, and I want to raise stuff. And I want to literally eat that place. I want that place to become part of you, part of me. And so I raise a tomato that takes the nutrients out of the ground, and I eat it. So I had a little garden in the back of the house. And I'm digging out there one day, and suddenly my hoe hit that hoe. My hoe was a metal hoe. that is an Indian hoe. So 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, some Indian in Middletown now, had his garden in the same exact spot that I had mine. And our hoes clicked against each other.
So is that a way of saying everything happens for a reason?
I don't know if everything happens for a reason, but everything happens. And synchronicity, yeah.
Okay.
There's no such thing. My ho-chunk friends tell me all the time, there's no such thing as coincidence. And I could name you 1,000 stories and tell you 1,000 stories.
I'm a believer in that.
One right after another of my whole life. My whole life's been just one big package of synchronicity.
Now we're going to do a little show and tell. I call it picture association, and you've had a prolific life, so there's a lot of pictures. So we're going to try to go through these and be as respectful as we can with each one. Here's the first one up.
Oh, that's the old home place.
Okay.
That was the place, the second house we lived. I was born in a shack, and that one was a log house. So I tell everybody I wasn't born in a log house, but we moved into one as soon as we could afford it.
I got you. Now, this is jumping several years ahead.
That's the Jesse Stewart at the Kentucky State Poetry Society, and all those people except me are now gone. Passed to the next
Like you said,
level.
part of life, right? Here you
Right.
are.
Yeah, that's the great Ellis Hartford, who was head of the community colleges when Tomorrow's People came out.
And this looks like you with your lovely wife, Joy.
That's me and Joy. Jesse Stewart's in the background over there. He's signing books at the Cumberland, Kentucky Library in Harlan County.
And next up, here we go.
That's my teaching, one of my classes, creative writing classes in Harlan County. That's Barbara Sewell right there in the front. She was a wonderful, wonderful writer.
Here's another photo, same time
and
frame.
the guy where your finger is there on the left of it, Bruce Ayers, went on and became president of that college.
Well, I'll be.
And was president of that college for 26 years. Very well
See
respected.
the impact you have on people? Looks like you're doing my kind of work here.
Yeah, well, after Harlan County, I was interviewed by KET in Lexington. That's
I got you.
taking place there.
And this is you with...
That's me and Pete Seeger. I got to know Pete Seeger when I was in New York, and Pete came to Harlan County and gave a concert and asked me to come perform on the program.
This is one of my favorite pictures of the
Yeah,
bunch.
that was done at Murray, Kentucky, and this Joy and me. I love that picture too.
Yeah, that's a priceless one.
Meaning,
You love your guitar, I see.
that's a funny picture there. That's back at Jefferson Community College, and they had me come out and do the guitar, but the newspapers came and covered that because they got word that the Iranians were going to have a big rally, and they thought I was part of it. I was
jeez, because your beard, maybe, who knows. Now, who's this lady?
in the right place at the wrong time. That's me and my mother in the little Pennington Cemetery up on White Oak.
That's great. And here's your first of your travel pictures.
Well, that was of course at the Parthenon. Joy and I. The wind was so hard. She had her hair done, and it blew the bobby pins out of her hair.
Is this the infamous Leaning Tower?
Yeah, the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Yeah. You don't mess around. Here you are giving a speech, it looks like, or introduction.
I was, that was the Hotel Francis in San Francisco in 1981. I addressed the World Congress of Poets that year.
That's great.
It was a beautiful.
Now, this might be going backwards, but I don't know. This looks like what time frame?
That is at the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. I got invited to come and tell stories, and I told them I don't tell stories. And they said, well, what do you do? And I said, I just talk. They said, well, come talk. And so that's what I did.
This book we've had on there, which is up front.
Yeah.
Now, what's this book about?
Yeah, that's the cover of my first book of poetry, Scenes from a Southern Road.
Did you know then that that's what you were going to be doing a lot more of?
No, I had no idea. I dreamed of things happening, but I never dreamed all that has happened.
And this one's actually on the table there,
Yeah.
Wildflower.
Now, Wildflower was never meant to be a book.
Really?
Joy was in the hospital, and it was only the first time we'd been apart as much as one day in the first 10 years of marriage. And she had to go to the hospital, and so we were separated. And I wrote this little book for her while she was in the hospital. And I got a tablet, and it said Wildflower on it. And so I said, Wildflower, Poems for Joy. But an editor heard about it, and they kept after me until they...
That's great.
Joey said, go ahead, let them do it. And so that was public.
No, this is in the 70s, I believe.
That was a play I did at Berea called The Porch, and that was my first produced play.
Coal Mine, what's this about?
Coal Mine was a play for voices. It's been done a number of times since.
And this one?
Yeah. Appalachia My Sorrow, the late Louise Scribner at Berea asked me if I would do a play for voices that captured Appalachia, and that was my attempt.
That's great. Song?
Spring of Violets for Joy, that one meant to be a book. That was the second time Joy was in the hospital, and I knew that was going to be a book.
Now this one's on the corner of the table.
Yeah, Thigmotropism.
What does that mean, by the way?
Thigmotropism is the unusual power of plants, vining plants. If you take a vining plant and you plant it here, say a pole bean, and you put a pole over here, when the plant comes up, it goes toward the pole. Now, if you take the pole and move it over here, the plant will turn and go toward the pole. Now, if you put a plant here, which they've tested this, and you put a wall here and a pole behind the wall, the plant will go around the wall and up the pole. And that force is called thigmotropism. And it's the same thing that happens to humans. I say, okay, you're at a football stadium, and there's a boy on one side and there's a girl on the other side. They look at each other, and next thing you know, they're passing out pictures of grandchildren. So I use that as a symbol.
Here we are, more travel.
Yeah, that's Easter Island, of course. And that, by the way, is a very deceptive kind of picture, because that's the picture that everybody there sees.
Okay.
The seven moai at Akiva, and they look out to sea. And everybody thinks that all the moai, there are 1,000 of them on the island, by the way, they think all of them look out to sea. That's the only ones that look to sea. All the rest of them look back over the island.
Here you are with Jill.
Yeah, that's in Indonesia.
I'm glad you guys like to travel, because look at these.
Yeah.
Here we go, folks. Where's this?
That's in Bosnia.
Wow.
That's at a very important site in Bosnia. And that is the Bosnian pyramid behind us. That Bosnian pyramid has been carbon dated at 26,000 years old. It's 40 times larger than the Great Pyramid in Egypt.
Now, is this Devil's Tower? Or
That's Devil's Tower.
Yeah. Wow. That's Arizona, right? Am I wrong, or no?
In Wyoming.
Wyoming. I blew that one, folks.
Yeah.
And what's this?
And that's Gunung Padang in Indonesia. That is a man-made structure, goes down almost a mile.
Here you are again.
Yeah, and that's at Machu Picchu in Peru.
Now you guys clean up well.
That's the staircase on the Titanic.
Look, I know you've been around, but you're not that old, Lee. Come on now.
Hey, I will surprise you on how old I am. No, that they use that as a backdrop on one of the ships.
I'll be.
On the ship we're on.
And then I couldn't be remiss if I didn't share this.
Yeah, that's where we live at Kratz Place. It was an old tavern. What I say to everybody was a poor man's tavern.
I love that. And here we are, some friends.
Grandfather William Commanda, he was the Algonquin holy leader. He was holy leader for North America and South America, and this was our first meeting of him.
And what's this?
And this is the wonderful late Ann Caudle, wife of Harry Caudle.
Okay.
I did a documentary on her.
More travels.
Yeah, and that's Yoshihiko Sonoda, Polynesian legend. Let me tell you about that. I went down to the desk on the island of Huahine, and I said, is there anybody here who speaks English and can go out to these marae and talk about them? They said, no, nobody. So I told Joy we'd go out and film and then come back, and I'll do narration over it. we got back, and I said, I'm going to go down and ask again. We went down to the desk, and I asked again. They said, Sonoto's coming in at 5:30. All my bones disappeared. I was trying to stand up just with flesh, no bones, and I was a pile of humanity in the middle of the floor. It was so shocking. I went back to Joy and I said, guess who's coming in at 5:30? Yoshihiko Sonoto was the person who did all of the archaeologist of the Bishop Museum who had done all the reconstruction of all the Moriah that we were filming.
Huh.
And he's coming in at 5:30. And Joy said, he won't give you the time of day. And I said, I know that, but when he gets out of that car, my hand's going to go out and it's going to say, Dr. Sonoto, I'm an American filmmaker and I'd like you to go to the Moriah and talk about them with us. And I said, when he quits laughing, I'll say, would you give me 5 minutes in front of the hotel? He gave us 4 days.
Oh, wow.
Took us to all the Moriah, the mountain Moriah that we didn't even know about, that he had rebuilt. It was a marvelous, marvelous experience.
All right, I'm flying on. Here we go.
Yeah, that's Paji Harole. Paji I met in Papua New Guinea during the first film that I did.
And
those are the mud men, the mud people.
Okay. And what's this one?
And that's the Los Lunas Decalogue stone in New Mexico. It's got the 10 Commandments written on it in an ancient language.
Wow.
They call it Paleo-Hebrew. And that's one of the Sanskrit stones in Indonesia. India's civilization may have come from the original Indonesia. That's Saguaro, of course, in Arizona.
Is this you guys?
Takes 90 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's me with Denny Kirtley, who's a great horn player in Nashville.
That's my middle name. Maybe we're related.
Yeah. Denny's just real special.
Another Denny.
Yeah, another Denny. You know, he's just out of the hospital now following a second stroke.
Yep. He was a guest we had on years ago.
Wish him all the luck
Same.
in the world.
And speaking of that, another guest.
Yeah. Oh, Dick Wilson and Paji Harole and yours truly with a Kina shell.
Okay.
That came out of New Guinea.
You got to go to the Derby some point.
Oh, yeah. That's the little girl in the B-52. You know her name?
Yeah, I know her.
Yeah.
Is this, now who are you dancing with here?
I don't know her name, but she asked me. She's a belly dancer in Turkey and Istanbul, and she got me up on the stage and said, you do everything I do, and I did, and she finally backed off.
All right, we're winding down. Here we go.
Yeah, that's several of my films were done at locally at the Thomas Jefferson Unitarian Church, and that's one of them. That was the first poetry reading I gave at the University of Louisville.
For a guy with your energy level, that's why there's so many pictures. This is the day of the library, right?
Yeah, that's the opening of the Lee and Joy Pennington Cultural
Who has their own
Heritage
library
Gallery.
and lives to see it? That's what amazes me about you.
Well, it's totally amazing.
And here you are.
And I am the first Tuesday at U of L working on scrapbooks and this, that, and another.
And there's the ribbon cutting.
Oh, that's me and the great Bob Fox, who's the head of the library.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't put this in here. This is the last picture. This is when we met earlier this year.
That is so beautiful.
These.
What a great day that was.
It was a great day.
Just to be there.
Just to be human, frankly.
Yeah, be at that moment.
We sat around a table.
There we are. Oh, my goodness. And look at that handsome guy way back there.
I don't know who that is. Evil twin or whatever. Thanks for sharing all that with us. Try to cover everything there with the amount of time we have.
Oh, that's beautiful.
If someone asked you, what does Lee Pennington stand for, what would you tell them? Not what they might say, but what would you tell them?
I think I stand for love of humanity.
Okay.
People say of me, and it's very true, I love people. And I think that whole thing of being able to get along and just have a sincere, deep love for other human beings. You know, we're on this great journey together on this spaceship called Mother Earth. And what a pleasure it is just to be riding through.
And we don't really know what it's all about, but we think we do.
Oh, we know a little bit, but you know, as the Hispanics say, poquito.
Is there a difference today in the types of poets that you run across than when you first started? And do you feel as well, I'll kind of add on to this, that someone coming along now, 21st century, could have the kind of career you've had in poetry?
Poets today are, the same that they've always been. They are curious beings. They want to discover things, and they set about to do it. Poetry has changed, and one person changed the horizon of poetry.
Okay.
Back before the internet. A lot of the academic people don't care anything about him, but I love him because he broke us through. His name was Rod McEwen.
Okay.
And Rod McEwen at one time sold more books of poetry than all the previous poets in existence beforehand, including Shakespeare.
Okay.
And Rod McEwen, I think it was one of the quarters, he was with Random House, and after he sold 70,000 books out of his basement on his first book, but he was with Random House, and they sent him a check for $900,000.
That'll motivate you.
And he wrote them and said, "You'll be interested in knowing you are now my third largest source of income."
On that note, I can't wait to this next question. If you were granted, I know you've been driving your own bus for a long time, but if you were granted 2 weeks right today, or you gave yourself 2 weeks, 14 calendar days, 10 business days, and you've traveled quite extensively across the globe, unlike a lot of our guests, where would you go? What would you do? Who would you take with you? Money's no object. Ideally, no technology. What would you do?
I would go any place that I haven't been, because I'm trying to be in 100 countries before I die, and I've been in 90.
You'll get there.
And so, yeah, I'll get there if Providence hangs on and I hang on. But every place I've ever been has been a trip of the lifetime.
Mm-hmm. You can tell from the pictures.
Yeah, it's just, somebody says, well, that's going to be a trip of a lifetime. Well, I've done hundreds of trips, 90 countries, that's a lot of trips. But every single one of them has just been astounding to me. I see things that I never dreamed of seeing. Early on, when I was physically able to get through jungles and things like that, I went to pretty exotic places. And now, if a bus can't get there, in somewhat
the circle
trouble.
of life, right?
Although I was out in Canyon de Chelly with Jill, and there's a trail leads down to what's called the White House. It's an Anasazi structure that's brilliant white, so you can see it for miles. But that's the only one you can go by yourself. And at the top of the hill, it said 2.5 miles. Well, I didn't know if I could do 2.5 miles. And so I thought, well, I plan to be cremated, and I can be cremated down there as well as back in Louisville. So if I can get down there, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
and so I went down, and down at the bottom of the hill, it was amazing because the sign down there said 3 miles.
Oh no.
3 miles back. So I said that's Indian way, 2.5 miles down, but 3 miles back. That's just the whole thing, everything that I've done all my life. I don't worry whether or not I can make it. I had a doctor on this last trip say, you shouldn't be traveling. You don't need to be out traveling. That's the worst thing that anybody
it's like
could say.
Saying you can't drive your car anymore or whatever.
Right.
Yep.
So bad advice. Keep doing it.
I like it. If you alone could have dinner with anyone living or deceased, who would it be and why? It could be a buffet, one-on-one, gathering at a table, sit down.
That'd be pretty easy for me. Leonardo da Vinci.
Huh.
Yeah, I would.
Makes sense.
Yeah, one of the great minds of all times, and I'd especially like to ask him what he thinks of Dan Brown. Just off the top of my head. No, but he would be, just to be in his presence, to hear his voice, to be overwhelming to me.
If you could have written a letter to the younger Lee Pennington, what would you have told him? Note to self.
Let's see, I'd say, Dear Lee, do more, learn more,
Mm-hmm.
be more, do the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
Signed, Lee.
That's pretty cool. I like that. It's almost like a good piece of advice quote. Do more, be more, see more.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, I learned part of that from Aristotle and Jesse.
Mm-hmm.
Said, know thyself, be thyself, and Jesse added, improve thyself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a good model to kind of live by.
Well, that's a good way to segue into our signature question. We've asked every guest. You're our 306th. Just about every guest we've asked this. You know, God forbid, Lee, you've had this prolific life in poetry, filmmaking. You've traveled the world, but today's your last day on earth. You walk out of the studio. How do you want to be remembered by all the students you taught, all the writing, the way you taught that, you know, wives, family? How do you want to be remembered?
That's pretty easy for me, I think. I want to be remembered as somebody who left the world better than he found it.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that partially from my father. Dad was a hillside farmer.
Okay.
And Dad always said, I want to leave the land better than I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad would not permit erosion. He would put little sticks and rocks, and if erosion started, on the hillsides he'd plant strawberries around the hill. And if you know strawberries, they just madden so that water coming down the hill hits a strawberry wall, and it goes out to the end of the row, and by then the water's gone down into the ground, and so you don't have erosion. And every year we would go, my brothers and sisters and I, and go into the woods with blankets and fill them up with leaves and take them and put them on the fields. That was to leave the land better than we found it. So if that can happen with me, I've lived by that. If I go into a room, I want to leave that room better than I found it. If I go out into a city, I want to leave that city better than I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I leave this great spaceship that we're on,
Mm-hmm.
if only the tiniest bit, if we can say, he left it better than he found it, then I'll be happy.
Well, I can attest as host of this program that I've created and had a lot of help making it what it is. You have left this show better than you found it before you came on. And I'm honored and humbled that you joined us on Moxie Talk. Really mean it.
Thank you
sir.
so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. If today's discussion has inspired you, we'd love to hear from you. And if you know someone who has Moxie and a story worth sharing, let's talk. Just visit our website, MoxieTalk.com, or type in Moxie Talk with Kirt Jacobs on all your social media platforms. Until next time, I'm Kirt Jacobs. Thanks for watching.